Hello and welcome to the Success Showcase. I'm your host, Eric Lopkin from the Modern Observer Group. And with me, as always, is Chip Janiszewski from the Happiness and Success GPS. Chip, how you doing?
Good. How are you, Eric?
I'm doing fantastic. We're wrapping up Halloween and heading into Thanksgiving season.
Yep. Had a nice windy, rainy thing. The leaves are falling off the trees. Still nice though. But yep, we're looking at Thanksgiving in a couple of weeks.
Yeah. And of course, we always advise people to be thankful for what they have. And today, we're going to go back to the bookshelf with the Success Showcase Book Club. And this episode, we're looking at Take the Stairs.
Yes, this book was written before escalators and elevators.
Well, no, that's actually the focus of it, is that you shouldn't take the escalator, you should take the stairs.
Yeah, this is a book that I read for the first time and talked about way back in 2012. So it's not a new book, and I think you're going to bring up that some of the links in the book aren't working right now as far as that goes, but you can still find a lot of stuff on there. But really, what it's all about is that success is all about doing things that aren't easy, but that you have to do. And the bottom line is that people don't ordinarily do these things. So the successful people do things that aren't easy. The people who don't ordinarily do those are not as successful. So it's really all about self-discipline.
Yeah, self-discipline is the focus of the book. It's a fantastic book. And yes, as Chip mentioned, the book came out in 2012. And if you're going to go out and read the book, there are several parts in the book that they tell you about web resources that are online. However, those links no longer seem to work. So the book itself is well worth the read. Just don't worry about the web resources.
Yeah, we're going to be talking about 7 principles too. And in the back of the book, there's a nice little quick reference section that has like 3 different points, 3 exercises to do and action items and so on and so forth. So it's a really great book. It's only 200 pages long, and highly recommend that you pick up a copy or listen to it on Audible after we get done with this podcast.
Yes. One of the things that I really liked about this is that it talks right from the beginning about the fact that so many people are enamored with the law of attraction, and they forget that the law of attraction is just the starting point. And if you want anything to happen, you actually have to take action and do something to make your success happen.
In fact, that's the last principle.
It's the last principle, but he talks about it right at the beginning of the book. So everything is involved in this. And it's really key because there are so many books out there that focus on the law of attraction. And when you go into the implementation, you find out that that's not enough. You actually have to plan and move forward and take action and do the hard things that people don't necessarily want to do.
Yeah, and he sets it up nicely. He talks about our procrastination, Nation, which is basically the lack of self-discipline that a lot of us have. He talks about that in the workplace. He says the average worker wastes 2 hours a day, which back in 2012 numbers translated to $10,000 per employee per year, which is a whole lot of money.
It is, and I'm sure it's more now. And it becomes this way because a procrastination is so easy. And we have this habit of looking for the easy way out. And that's what he talks about when he explains the title of the book, is that he was at a mall and he's looking, and there's a packed escalator with people are lined up to take the escalator. Right next to it is a flight of stairs, and there's nobody on the stairs. We've become conditioned to look for the easy way out and take that. And that's not how success works.
Yeah. So, I mean, the first thing that he starts with, I mean, what he did was really principle number one. He sacrificed, which is the paradox principle. He sacrificed the convenience of not having to walk with walking. And what this says is that paradox is a statement or a group of statements that leads to a contradiction or a situation which, if true, defies logic or reason. And right off the bat, he comes up with different examples about these different principles. And I love the example that he talked about out in Colorado where he used to live. Um, it's one of the few places on earth that has both cattle and buffalo. And they're right at the base of the Rocky Mountains. And the storms normally comes from the west over the Rocky Mountains. And what happens is when the storm comes over the Rocky Mountains, the cattle start running with the storm, which prolongs their agony and pain just by running with the storm. And what most people do is just go with the flow, hoping things are going to get better. Whereas the buffalo, once they see that coming and it comes over the mountain, they turn directly into it and run right through the storm. Quick pain, but they're done a lot quicker and they have a quick gain on there. And this is what he talks about is that pain today um, outweighs logic in a lot of ways. So it's the pain paradox. Emotions outweigh logic a lot. And it's our emotions and our feelings and that kind of thing that get us into trouble because we just kind of float with them. And that's why things don't happen.
Right. I mean, using that example, people are very prone to trying to avoid the pain. And very often we find ourselves in situations that if you just face the pain, it's over quickly. And when you try to avoid it, you actually end up prolonging it. Um, when I was reading the book and he was giving the buffalo and cows example, the first thing that popped into my mind was a band aid. People like peel it off, tentatively and slowly because they don't want it to hurt when they pull it off. But the fact of the matter is, when you yank it off quickly, it hurts a lot less. So you have to be willing to accept that pain and move through it.
Yeah, he talks about the pain paradox of decision, and it states short term easy leads to long term difficult, while short term difficult leads to long term easy. And that's exactly an example of that. Just get it done with, and it's done.
All right. I don't remember who said it, but there was an old saying, if you find an easy road, it probably doesn't lead anywhere. And it's true. We have to make the sacrifice and accept that things are not going to be easy. And he talks about, work life balance and how people tend to think that, oh, well, it means, you're spending the same amount of time and the same amount of effort. And that's not really true about a work life balance. There are times when you have to head full steam into work and plow through that. And then later on, you get the benefits of that and you get to spend the time with your family and your life. So work life balance really becomes a long-term prospect rather than, well, I don't want to work so many hours because I want to be able to spend time with my family. It's a matter of sacrificing one or the other in the short term so you can spend more time with it on the long term.
Yeah, and that kind of takes us to the next principle, which is committing to doing something, the buy-in principle. And what the commitment principle is all about, it's the emotional energy of making a decision. It's greater than the physical energy of executing the decision from time to time. And he used the example where somebody walked into the men's room and saw another person staring at his $5 bill that's in the urinal. And he says, "Oh, wow, that's a tough decision. What are you going to do?" And that person who was staring at it takes out a 50 and drops it in there. And then he says he's going to take both of them out because it's a lot stronger decision. So the guy says, "What are you doing?" And he says, "Well, come on, don't you think I'd stick my hand in there for just $5?" So everybody's got like a breaking point, and that's really what this is about. It's emotional energy of doing something.
Right.
Instead
And
of trying, it's doing.
I love that example because it shows, you know, he's not just making the decision to go in after it. He's actually doubling down on that decision, actually 10 times, down. But because when we make decisions, very often it's like, well, is that worth it? Is it not? And if the value of something becomes much greater, the decision becomes easier. It's like, oh, well, of course it's worth that.
Yeah, there comes a breaking point where the commitment's about asking yourself, how will I? And it all of a sudden switches to should I. I mean, it switches from should I to how will I. The bottom line is once it becomes urgent enough, he used another example of, I guess, when they were young, a ball flew over the fence into somebody's yard who everybody was scared of, and they figured out a way to get it out. Whereas before, nobody would even think about doing that kind of thing. But that's what this is about. Instead of saying should I, should I, should I, he talks. I like this term, should heads.
Yes.
And basically it's just how will I. The bottom line is you take a look at it. If it's really worth doing, just make the decision to do it now instead of procrastinating on it.
Right. The real key to this can come down to one word. You have to change your decision process from will I do this to how will I do this? And making that commitment to move forward. Well, quite frankly, that decision right there is more than most people make, which is why there are so many people stuck in dead end jobs, struggling to make ends meet. When you make that decision and you commit, that's the first step to success. You're no longer asking, well, will I be a success? You've already decided you're going to be a success. Now you're figuring out how.
Yep. And one of the best ways to really enforce this principle is moving on to the next principle. It's focus. It's the magnification principle. And the bottom line is focus is doing something, and focus is really, really power. He talks about three different types of procrastination, which is just classic, consciously delaying what we know that we should be doing, and then creative avoidance, which is very dangerous because the bottom line is it's unconsciously filling the day with menial work where you look like you're busy and you're getting absolutely nothing done. You're just being busy doing nothing. And then the third type is priority dilution, which these are mostly high performing people who know what their goals are, but nonetheless, they allow their attention to shift to other things. So, I mean, focus is really, really important. And the words focus is power really describes the whole thing.
Yes, focus is a crucial element. And in fact, focus is so important that when we created our Biznetics system, focus is the second element to get, to reach success. I love that he talks about the process of 212 degrees. And for those of you who are not familiar with this, water boils at 212 degrees Fahrenheit. At 211 degrees, it's just water. At 212 degrees, the difference of 1 degree, it becomes steam. Steam can then be used to power engines. So the difference between a pot full of water and powering an engine is 1 degree. And it's so important because it points out that when you're focusing, all it really takes is one little step, and each step becomes that powerful.
Yeah, and he talks a lot about focusing on thoughts because thoughts are our biggest enemy. He talks about Mr. M on our shoulder, who's Mr. Mediocrity, and he's Mr. Negative, and that's that inner voice that's always in you that's complaining and seeing the negative side of things and so on and so forth. And the bottom line is, we talk about this all the time as far as positive mindset. Mr. Mediocrity, the negative side of things, cannot stand up against positivity. And so he talks about things like positive affirmations and vision boards, automatic things that you can do to switch off Mr. Mediocrity. And that's really, really so important because the bottom line is once you're feeling down, if you don't get over that, you are going to lose your focus on anything positive until you turn it on.
And that's very true. And unfortunately, we all have Mr. Mediocrity on our shoulder. And he's always going, well, why should you be able to do that? Oh, that's too hard. If you've seen when he was talking about Mr. Mediocrity, it actually made me think of the Mucinex commercials that are on TV now, where the mucus is trying to get you to stay in bed and be sick, and you have to get moving. Mr. Mediocrity is that same sort of thing. It's telling you, oh, sit on the couch, watch TV, do what's easy. But the problem is, when you're doing what's easy, you're not getting what you want. You're comfortable now, but your goals don't get met. So we
Yeah, one of the things that he talks about, he has this
bit of Mr. Mediocrity.
That's right. He built a consulting company, which you'll find out in the book around a lot of these principles. But he talks about visioneering, and visioneering is a term that combines vision and engineering. And basically, these are things that are conceived first of all in your mental world, thoughts, and so on and so forth. But if you can start putting these things down on paper visually and engineering ways to make them work, he says this is the thing that one of the first things that he does with all of his consulting clients.
And it's true, you have to be able to envision what it is you want. And the more detailed that vision, the better it is. Because when you see the details, when you see everything that's involved with it, it helps you figure out what actions are necessary to get there.
Yeah, it really goes back to Stephen Covey's principle number 2 of the 7 habits. It's beginning with the end in mind. Because from visioneering come your goals, and the rest just falls right into place when you act.
Exactly. So then he talks about the creation principle and integrity. And this is something that people really have to take to heart, because I heard a definition of integrity once that I absolutely loved. Integrity is that you're doing the right thing when nobody else knows about it. So it's about you're doing the right thing for you. There's no grand reward. There's no pat on the back. But by doing the right thing, it moves you along towards your goals.
Yeah, he talks that the creation principle of integrity states that all creation follows a simple and powerful pattern. You think it, you speak it, you act it, it happens. And as you were saying, nobody's going to know that, but that's just the way that you do things. And if you have that going, then your integrity is going to be intact big time.
Right. And when he talks about this, he talks about Genesis, because in Genesis, God literally speaks the universe into existence. And he uses that as an example of how powerful speaking these things are. Again, you think it, you're putting your thoughts into the universe, you're speaking it, you're giving it sound, you're giving it substance, then you act on it.
Yeah, and he talks about ways to strengthen the way you talk, your word, and other ways that are negatives for that. And ways to strengthen your word is number one, inventing the possibility. In other words, seeing that something can possibly happen. Obviously, expressing gratitude for everything in your life is really, really important. You cannot, Mr. Mediocrity cannot survive in the face of gratitude. Complimenting people, seeing other people who can't, for whom they can become rather than criticizing them, and holding other people accountable to what's best for them, not teaching them and that kind of thing, but working with them that way. And then obviously integrity is walking the talk without people noticing.
Right. And that's also so key. There are so many people that talk the talk, but Do you follow through? Do you actually take the action that your words are saying? And that's what integrity is about. It's about when you say something, people know you're actually going to do it. And he also talks about negative ways that you weaken your word. And he talks about like breaking your promises. You do that, your word doesn't mean anything to anyone because they can't take you seriously. He talks about uncontrolled language, and where it's you're just saying, to say, and you don't realize the impact that you're having on others. And in that, he actually talks about when you say something positive and then say but.
Yeah, that totally
Because
wipes out the positive effect and makes it negative. So, and then obviously criticizing people, tearing other people down, creating backdoors for undisciplined people to, renege on their commitments, um, gossiping, using too many words, and so on and so forth. The bottom line is the less you say, the better off you're going to be. And then the last one he talks about is intellectual dishonesty, where you're not telling a lie, but you're not exactly telling the truth. And he talks about salespeople, talking about competitors, where the competitors got a competitive advantage over something that they do also. However, they don't do it as well. And somebody will ask you, "Do you do that?" And you just say, "Yep," without explaining anything. So a lot of that's the bottom line is if you get found out for something like that, it's definitely going to damage your credibility too.
absolutely. And from there, he goes on to talk about your schedule and the harvest principle. And I think the harvest principle is a great analogy because when it's harvest time, the farmer doesn't really have an option. It's either he works, until the harvest is over and he gets all of it done, or he's going to suffer for the next year until the next harvest.
Yeah, if you don't get the harvest done, you're not going to sell anything. You're going to have a lot of rotting crops and things aren't going to work out. And so this leads to double time, part time versus full time, free time principle. And the bottom line is he talks about as far as schedules go, a lot of people have seasonal businesses when you have to work a lot harder sometimes, or if you're looking to advance, you have to do things a lot up front to get a degree or to do this or do that. But a lot of people just think if they put in the time, eventually things are going to happen. So double time, part time, using the harvest principle is really, really a good analogy of this because at harvest time, you're going to be working 16 hours a day. And once you're done working, winter's going to come and all of a sudden you're going to have money in the bank from what you've done and you're going to be able to take a vacation. And that's the way that it works there. For other people, if you do the double time, part time, it may last for a whole career. But the bottom line is that there are times when you're going to have to do that. And this is the scheduling principle. And what you have to do is you have to schedule it right into your routines.
All right. And one of the things he talks about, actually, in the perspective principle, and he ties these two things together with this example of an 80-foot tape measure. And if you think the average person lives 80 years, then each foot is 1 year of your life. And he's talking to, the example is in a class, and he's talking about the years you spend in college. Well, it's 4 years in college, but then when you take away all of the hours that you're not in class, that you're sleeping, it ends up essentially being 1 foot out of 80 that you're really pushing through to get work done. And that 1 foot affects everything after it because it's your degree, it's your learning skills, it's all of these things. And when you take the perspective principle, you look at it like, okay, yes, I'm really pushing through for 1 year out of 80, or now life expectancy is even longer. So you have to have the faith and the perspective that the efforts you're putting in now are going to pay those dividends later on and possibly in perpetuity.
Yeah, absolutely. The bottom line is if you want to change your behavior, if you want to succeed, you have to change your perspective. And we talk about perspective as one of the most powerful terms ever. There may not be a more relevant statement to improving our self discipline than that. And I firmly believe that. The bottom line is um, there's a line here that says our ability to have peace is directly proportionate to the term of our perspective. That is the perspective principle of faith. So it's so important to believe that you're putting in your double time and things are going to work out. And it's going to work out just like you said. They are very, very closely tied together.
And one of the things he says when looking at the tape measure is that when you think of having a bad day, well, one day is a couple of millimeters on that tape measure. So by putting it into that perspective, it's this tiny thing in the vision of your entire life. And then he goes into the pendulum principle, which is what all of this led to, which is actually taking action.
Yeah, it was a really, really neat analogy that he used to that. He talked about his instructor talking about the pendulum, and it never goes higher than its initial point. Do you believe this? Yes, I believe it. Yet, and do you believe it? Do you really believe it? Yes, I really believe it. And then he talked about the fact that in his class, the instructor pulled aside a large curtain and there was a large pendulum there. And Rory was actually the student that was mouthing off to him a little bit, and he put him up on a chair where the pendulum, and then he pulled this big, huge pendulum right next to his face and let it go. And he said, "Do you believe it?" And Rory jumped off the chair. So basically, no matter how much you believe, it's what makes you act, and that's how he led into this action principle. And so I thought that that was very, very entertaining. But he also talked about really one of our biggest possible enemies in this thing, and that's called the law of diminishing intent. And that, the bottom line is, you can come up with the greatest idea in the world, work at it for a long, long time, and so on and so forth. But eventually, it's human nature to relax a little bit. Maybe you're not seeing the results, or this or that, or whatever. And all of a sudden, you start procrastinating on things. And if you do that, it's really, really going to sink you. So he talks about writing down your goals, constantly taking action, which is the way to eliminate this diminishing intent.
All right. When you have a long term goal, it becomes harder and harder to reach that goal. Ironically, the closer and closer you get to it. That's one of the reasons when we created our time management system, we have daily sprint goals because this is a goal that's for that day. Short period of time, short goal gets you, moves it down the field. It's very important, and he uses the example of New Year's resolutions, why most New Year's resolutions by March have already fallen by the wayside is that the law of diminishing returns, it's harder and harder to keep motivating yourself to do these things. And I think, one way that he comes about is making those shorter goals and reiterating the goals. So you're not making the goal, to go to the gym for all year. You're making the goal to go to the gym 3 times this week. And then next week you make the same goal. The goal is go 3 times this week. And each week it's a different, it's the same goal, but it's starting over to achieve that smaller goal. And those are the actions that get you where you want to go.
Yeah, he mentioned what's holding you back, and this is a procrastination. He talks about the three phases of inaction, and where if we realize this is happening, we can do something about it. But the three phases of inaction, number one is fear, being scared to do it. Number two is entitlement, saying I shouldn't have to do this. And then number three is perfectionism, which a lot of people get caught right here. I won't try to do it if I can't do it right. And people always think about how am I going to do this perfectly? And they spend days, months, and years trying to figure that out instead of pulling the trigger and doing something.
Right. We refer to that as analysis paralysis. And, it's more important to get something done well than it is to get it done perfectly. So we're just about at the end of our time. So, Chip, what do you think is the big takeaway from this book?
Well, he talks about sacrifice, commitment, focus, integrity, schedule, faith, action. Really, we talk about perspective driving everything. If your perspective is to just pick up the ball and do something, climb the stairs right now, that is really the key to this whole thing. It's action.
Yeah, I think that really is the takeaway, is that we need to take action. No matter how good your plan is, no matter what else is going on, if you're not taking action, you're not getting where you want to be. So I think that for me is the big takeaway, is yes, you want to do planning, you want to understand the perspective, but get moving. And not next week, not next year, start now. You've been listening to the Success Showcase. You can catch us every week at xvadio.com/podcasts. You can also find us on the iTunes Store, the Apple Podcasts app, the iHeartRadio app, Spotify, and wherever you find podcasts. Remember, make this your best week ever and make next week even better. See you then.